our third webinar series, and today we are discussing mine health and safety. And the theme of our session this afternoon is now, new, and next in health and safety in the mining industry. I think this is a very topical theme. I think mine health and safety is always very prevalent and always very relevant in a country where we are largely dependent on the mining industry. We all know it's one of our biggest contributors to the GDP of the country. And I think to a large extent, we all have a vested interest in mining, whether we're directly involved in mining or not. And I think we all benefit from mining in the sense that everything we touch and everything we use nowadays, our computers, our cell phones, our cars, is impacted by mining because it is as a result of the resources that comes from our deposits. So, and as we know that this industry is a very labor-intensive industry, getting progressively digitized, but to a large extent, work are still done in a very manual manner. And that, of course, brings the human aspect to the forefront. So it's a great privilege for me to welcome you on this first Friday in spring to this webinar. And without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the panel this afternoon. And it's really wonderful to have speakers of this caliber on the panel this afternoon. Firstly, Dr. Karl Marx. Dr. Marx is a risk and management organizations. He's acted both as an executive, as a consultant, and he's also acted in support roles. Dr. Marx has an in-depth knowledge of mining risk assessments, including desktop reviews, consultations, and facilitation. He has a proven track record in providing risk management services to multicultural companies, ensuring that systems are aligned with corporate governance requirements, employees are suitably trained, and management is fully on board to implement solutions. Dr. Marx, welcome to this webinar series. And it's also a privilege for me to mention that you have worked very closely with Safety Cloud for the past couple of months, being very instrumental in developing one of our new flagship products, the HSE Sandtrack Mining Masterclass. Dr. Marx, welcome. Then Brett Solomon, Dr. Brett Solomon. Dr. Solomon is a recognized leader in using the latest research in neuroscience to boost leaders' effectiveness, entrenching a robust safety culture, and influencing their people in a manner that will promote safe practices. Brett, you have also been involved with Safety Cloud and NOSA previously. So welcome back again. And I have to admit, it is very difficult to get hold of Brett because he is always traveling to some or other exotic place. So Brett, we're very privileged and honored to have you in our midst this afternoon.
No, thanks, Dion. It's great to be with you.
And then Lee McMaster. I think Lee's, almost everyone in the mining industry knows Lee very well. Lee is the Vice President of ISA Mining and Principal Specialist Safety and Behavior at the Minerals Council. I think Lee is most certainly one of the most hands-on people in the mining industry. And just from personal experience, if you want to know what's going on in the mining industry, then give Lee a ring because he is always on top of new trends and new developments. So gentlemen, welcome to the panel this afternoon. So without further ado, I am going to ask, to start with Lee, Lee, what are the biggest challenges that the South African mining industry face in respect of health and safety? Mine health and safety um, has got such a long history, and there's so much invested in mine health and safety. And just bring us up to speed. What is happening? A couple of years ago, we saw quite a lot of fatalities and serious incidents. It seems as if the situation is improving, but is it improving?
Yeah, good afternoon, Dione, and thanks for the invite, and good afternoon to the fellow presenters and everyone on this webinar. Yeah, I think it's very difficult to, I think, surmise the picture of mine health and safety, in a few minutes. But I think we've obviously seen over the last 2 decades a massive improvement in specifically this safety figures, safety stats in the industry. Health picture, I think similar. We've seen improvements in occupational hygiene controls and exposures. But I think many of us in the industry know that the health data is always quite latent and lagging. So not as easy to really get the full picture on the health side as normally the case is with the safety. I think from a safety perspective, as I said, we've improved massively over the years. Those that have spent a lot of time in the industry would know that in the 90s and even in the early 2000s, we still had triple figure fatalities year on year. Massive problems in especially falls of ground, transport machinery as a broad classification. But we've seen obviously dramatic improvements in those areas. I think our best performance that we've achieved as an industry, and as many of the colleagues in this fraternity would often say, we still acknowledge that one fatality is one too many. But we've seen in 2019 50, number of 50 fatalities recorded in that year, which was the best performance that the industry has seen yet to date. And then we had a regression again, unfortunately, in 2021. 2022, we are trending very similar to the 2021 performance. So we've unfortunately this year had 34 loss of life incidents. But I think there's a lot that we can be quite positive about. As I said, fall of ground, we've seen 3 fall of ground loss of life incidents this year to date, which is, obviously a massive improvement in terms of what we've seen in previous years. And especially, I think, the guys in the hard rock sector, the platinum and gold miners, have really fared well in introducing better controls, managing their controls better. So a lot to be positive about. I think just briefly on the negative side, I think one issue for the mining industry globally is that we still focus immensely on lagging indicators. We don't have the level of maturity to focus more on our leading indicators and manage those appropriately. And then I think, the legacy of safety, if you read the early pieces of the likes of Reason and Heinrich and others, there's this fallacy that the biggest proportion of industry or incidents in industry and fatalities are caused by behavior of people. And hence I think often we try and fix people in the industry, but if you do thorough analysis, you actually see, and I mean there's some work done by Dr. Sean Brady in Australia and others. You see that the largest driving factor for incidents are still other technical systemical issues. So obviously not negating that it's quite important to take people along on the journey and constantly look at the culture of people. But in most cases, 85% of these unfortunate unwanted events that we see in industry is driven by systemic gaps in technology, processes, equipment. So we often set up people to fail as opposed to setting up people to succeed. Yeah, thanks, Danny. I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you, Lee. Carl, I'm interested to hear your view. I would like to think that being Safety Cloud, being in a training supplier, I'm keen to hear your view whether you think that training has made a contribution to the positive results we see, as Lee have just mentioned, or do you think that there's still a disconnect between the training that's available in the mining industry and what actually happens at an organization? So we know that there's lots of training courses available, but does companies really make use of the training that is available? Or is it simply because of better control measures and better supervision that we tend to see an improvement? What do you think is the key driver behind the improvements that we see in the industry?
Hi, Dione. Welcome to everybody. Hello, Lee. Haven't seen you in a while. Well, before I answer that question, I think what we need to first look at is give some context to the HSE challenges before we look at the challenges themselves and then the solutions. And one of the solutions could well be what you're talking about. So what I've done is I've looked at the NSA Young forecast for 2022, and I looked at the top 10 challenges they forecasted for the mining industry. And I'm just going to quickly run through them. Of course, number 10 is productivity and cost. Then new business models. The workforce is number 8, which is actually the one where we will be looking at a little bit more. Then you've mentioned the digitization and innovation in the industry that causes its own unique challenges, specifically for safety and health as well. Then the uncertainty in demand is, we might think that that has very little effect on safety. I have a different view on that. Then, of course, the other one, number 5, they're talking about capital or the availability of capital to expand and to build new mines and all those. Then, of course, the other one is geopolitical environment. Strangely enough, a year ago, October last year, when this report came out, they already mentioned that geopolitical instability was a huge cause for concern, number 4, in fact. The third one from the top is the license to operate that used to run for the last, I think, at least 8 years as number 1. Now, all of a sudden moved up to number 3. And then what is interesting to see is the number 2 and number 1, which is very, very, very exactly what we're talking about is the safety, health, and environment. Number 2, they call it decarbonization, or the CO2 releases in the atmosphere. And then the number 1 issue is the environment and the social issues. And that is exactly what we were looking at, which is the social issues, is the health and safety. So in respect of HSE, my feeling is the following: the existence of a negative culture. And I agree with Lee, there's a lot of technical stuff still to be done, but the negative culture when it comes to accident. Firstly, there is a deep entrenched blame culture in the mining industry, resulting in fundamental causes of accidents remaining hidden and will remain hidden until such time as we break that. I noticed in the beginning of this year that there was a drive through the Association of Mine Managers and the ISA and all these people to break that. My question is very simple, and that is in Section 63 of the Mine Health and Safety Act, there is a clause that says, for the purposes of enhancing the effectiveness of an investigation in terms of Section 60 of the National Prosecuting Authority can and may issue a certificate that no prosecution may be instituted, etc. We all know that. My question is, how often is that used? And is that not one of the areas which we should be focusing on to find out? Secondly, still under culture, is the existence of a justification culture when it comes to accidents. Once one of the single largest causes of fatalities, like Lee has mentioned a little bit earlier, in the mines used to be fall of ground. That's gravity as well as seismic combined. Now, this only accounts for a tiny number of occupational deaths in the industry. Yet, one still often hears the excuse, and I call it an excuse because that's exactly what it is, that South African mines are much deeper than the rest of the world, etc., etc., etc. However, we know that we've got a very good handle of fall of ground accidents. So that's the first one. I think the second one, where I would like to focus on, is a lack of line ownership for HSE, because it's being passed on to safety professionals. And here I just want to say, how often have we heard this on discovery of an unsafe condition, that someone will say, please inform the safety department to ensure that this is rectified? Wow. Wow, that's all I can ask. I want to say accolades to Anglo American Corporation, who is currently, as we speak, busy looking at a project to redefine the roles and responsibilities of safety and risk professionals and the line managers and supervisors in all of their operations. They will start in South Africa and Australia if they get it kicked off, and they plan to move away from the fact that safety and health professionals, safety and risk professionals, will become is cops, and they would rather want them to become advisors to line managers, who on their part must take ownership of HSE matters in their own areas of responsibilities. If we can change that, I think we will see a huge impact on health and safety. Thirdly, and this is the big one in my mind, the talent crisis. There's a talent crisis resulting from an unappealing work environment. We are now at the point where it is, and it has been unappealing for many decades, but we're now at a point where it's making it more and more difficult to find suitable skills for a safe and productive industry. Why do I say that? Mining is viewed as having an unsavory effect on the environment. We all know that. We fight that on a day-to-day basis. Secondly, mining environment, as Lee also mentioned, has a legacy of having a huge negative impact on the health of employees that only manifests and gets discovered decades later. Case in point, hearing and lung diseases. And lastly, mining is still being viewed as a dangerous place to work all over the globe. How do we solve this? What do we do to fix this? The only way to overcome this is to ensure suitable and sufficient training with practical skills outcomes. If we cannot have practical skills outcomes, it's a lot of theory, which people will say, well, I've learned that in a training course, and now let me go back. So I hope I've answered your question in a long-winded way to say to you, yes, there is definitely an impact already, because we do see, not enough, but we do see training courses that is out there that helps people to work more efficiently, to work safer, because if we work more safe and we work more efficient and more productive, safety and productivity goes hand in hand. People do not want to believe it, but it is the truth. So every penny we spend, any dollar, any rand, any bit of money we spend to improve the skills of people is money spent to improve safety. As long as it is not just a lot of theory, a lot of, and yes, we need the theory. I mean, I'm also an academic of some sort, but in a mining industry, we need to understand that if you are a manager and you haven't drilled a rock drill when you were a trainee, you do not understand the risks associated with doing that. And that's part of the problem that we are seeing, because at a certain stage we ran into a problem where we started running into a plateau where we couldn't improve, and nobody could understand it. But in the early 70s to around about the late 90s, there was a learner official scheme in place that every person, including me, Lee, and a lot of other people that I know, we used to do occupations, every occupation for a year. or sometimes for 2 years, where you would go from the driving locomotives and laying tracks. Why? Because it is to understand the risks associated with it. It's not. We shouldn't see that as a punishment. It is part of the training to understand the fundamental hazards associated with mining. If you talk to people of those ages that went through that at the time, that was probably one of the triggers that caused the South African mining industry to start bending the safety graph to start going down. The moment those people were in the workforce, and not as trainees, but as operators, as miners, as ship bosses, as mine captains, as managers, they started understanding and brought into their decision making the risks associated. So the training courses that is just based on theory, in my mind, has a place. But where we are currently in the mining industry, the shift should be more on teaching people skills rather than knowledge.
Absolutely.
And just a little advert there. I think we've, and probably towards the end of this webinar, we'll go into more detail. But I think what you have achieved when you gave us the brief was that this masterclass that you were talking about, we try to build in as much practical into that as possible, to the extent that very few tests and more practical assignments were incorporated in the course. So yeah, that's sort of my long answer to your short question. I'm sorry about, but I needed to put it in perspective because it's nothing stands on its own legs.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carl, for that very well, very detailed and well research and answer, and it clearly shows your long exposure to the industry and the challenges in the industry. Carl, both you and Lee have now, and I've taken notes, have touched on, the impact of culture. And I think in all industries, but specifically in the mining industry, culture still plays a large role. We've heard comments like, there's a negative culture, a blame culture, lack of line ownership. So, I'm keen to hear your view, Brett, on what we used to have in the mining industry, and I know you are very well aware of it. Methodologies like visible felt leadership and behavior-based safety. And I remember when I was at Anglo, everything was behavior-based safety and visible felt leadership. But a lot of those over time seem to, come and go, and some with a lot of positives, some with a lot of negatives. And they don't always seem to be very sustainable. So what is your view, and how do we address and tackle this culture thing? Because it always comes up, but we can't seem to solve it.
Okay. Well, what's a good afternoon to everyone, and to you again, Dione. Forgive me, I was in Dubai and it was so hot, so I was in an aircon room the whole time, and so I've got back and my throat is a little bit itchy. So yeah, so forgive me on that one. I think this is, for me, the intent of behavior-based safety is really, I think it was a beautiful idea. And so whether, if you look at James' reason that, most incidents is because of people, or if you look at Lee's comment that it's not as much, the fact of the matter is people play a significant role in the culture of the mining industry, safety and productivity. So we do need to consider the realities of people in how a mine functions. And my concern with behavior-based safety, it always comes down to the reality is you need to control my behavior. And if we have initiatives, training that is behavior focused, is it's typically with an assumption that because I know something, I'm going to do it, which is a fallacy, because I know that eating KFC is not healthy. I know for a fact, but I clearly, in spite of my knowledge, I still eat KFC. So we think that if we're going to try control people's behavior through behavior-based safety approaches, is there's only two ways of doing that. So the first is you need to in some way instill some sort of consequence. There's got to be some sort of discipline to say, Brett, if we catch you eat KFC, is you're going to get a hiding, or you're going to lose some money, or to an extreme situation, we're going to fire you. And then there's comments like that. Do you see the gate? So now it becomes some sort of threat. So that's the first way. Then the second way is, listen, if you don't eat Kentucky, is we'll give you McDonald's. And in the mining industry, we love bright packs and Cokes. So if we get 1 million LTI free hours, there'll be a bright pack and Coke. And then we'll give some sort of T-shirt or a jacket. And unfortunately, both of those approaches is trying to dictate my behavior, but the ownership relies with leadership. And somewhere along the line is we've got to go and say, how do we get people to work safely, effectively, efficiency, with quality, where it's now coming from within? And as long as we have a behavior mindset, we will never get it right. And somewhere along the line is I need to take ownership because it's who I am. So I don't eat Kentucky because I want to have a certain lifestyle. And until you shift, what I like the word, until you shift my belief around healthy living, or my attitude would be another word, or my philosophy, or my mindset, you will never get the behavior right unless you bring the stick or carrot approach. And they just simply aren't sustainable. So how do we shift people's beliefs, their mindsets, their philosophy about their contribution when it comes to effective and safe mining? So I don't know if that's answered your question.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Brett. And just by listening to you, and your comments about, what drives behavior.
Yeah.
There's an interesting new, I'm hesitant to call it a school of thought, but we hear more regularly now the term belief-based training. So tell me about this new school of thought, and how would this then differ from visible, felt, and behavior-based?
Yeah, I think maybe if I can make a comment, and then I think we do need to touch on visible felt leadership, because there's so many nuggets there that can be separated from behavior-based safety. So sometimes they lump together, and then a VFL is very ineffective. But then there's a lot of work being done around VFLs, or site walkabouts, whatever language we use, that is very effective. And I think we do need to distinguish that. I'm a strong component of some sort of belief-based interaction or belief-based approach to safety, is because what's happening now is I'm working safety, and we use the term safety, but for me, it's also about quality. It's also about effectiveness. It's about meeting our production targets. So where it comes to me as an individual, where I see myself as a contributor, where I see myself is I'm working safely, not because I want to please the CEO or the DMR or whoever it might be. I want to work safely because I want to go home. I want to enjoy a quality of life. And when we can move that ownership, is I'm going to start to make decisions of my own accord that is not manipulated, because I think that's the challenge when it comes to behavior-based. The moment we do a carrot or stick approach, is you are manipulating me in some way, and it only works as long as you are manipulating me. So the moment you're not there, Dr. Cole talked about the policeman, the fear factor. That's part of the culture where you're trying to manipulate me. And so when we get to a belief, is you get rid of the fear, you get rid of the policeman, because you don't need one. because there's this internal drive. And if we don't have strategies when it comes to shifting people's beliefs about who they are, how they work, their mindset towards the company, their mindset. Because another thing that Dr. Cole said that for me was very interesting is that we see safety as, or mining as, a dangerous environment where people will get injured. See, if that's my mindset, if that's my belief, guess what? I'm going to work in a way, well, we all going to get injured. You know, it sucks to be us. And I go, no, we need to have a different mindset to go, and you know what? We can work in a high risk environment, and we can do it safely. And if we don't have these belief strategies of how we shift people, we will continuously to struggle and get the results when it comes to the people component. So that's not the component that Lee was talking about, the innovation and technical side, the controls, but it comes specifically to the people element.
Very interesting, Brett, and maybe a last question on this topic. So this, please pardon me for using the word school of thought,
Yeah.
but this belief-based school of thought, is that a top-down or a bottom-up approach, or how does that work?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think that if we can bring it back to culture and understand the complexities, and I think this is my concern with, let's say, a VFL, is if I look at I want to say a good, what would be the word? Because there are frameworks when it comes to doing effective walkabouts. And it's got all the right elements. So it's I'm going to greet the person, I'm going to connect with the person, I'm going to listen to the person. So the essence of the framework of how we're going to connect with people is simply phenomenal. That's exactly what we want. But here becomes the problem, is I believe you don't like me. I believe you're here just to catch me out. I believe that this is just a executive exercise to comply to some sort of formula. So while the framework of a VFL is actually a phenomenal framework, but when you approach me, I believe it's a farce. Guess what? That interaction, no matter how cleverly designed, is still going to be meaningless. And so it's creating that culture behind the scenes to go, whatever interaction, whether it's staff upon staff or workers to their supervisors or from exco downwards, is if we're not shifting fundamental beliefs, our interactions will always have some sort of dynamic that is not bringing the outcomes that we are looking for. So a lot of our techniques either are poorly designed and need to be fixed, or are great design, if I think about most VFLs, but the problem is not the framework. The problem is the belief that even before I get on site, I'm still dead in the water. And if I don't fix the belief, these interactions are still we're going to struggle with them. And if we don't have a strategy to fix that stuff, we're going to continue to have the challenges we have. But when we get that right, then things like VFLs become so potent.
Yes, thank you for that, Brett. It's very interesting because and as you were speaking, I was constantly thinking about Maslow, and about the fact that we can only really see big, large scale change if it comes from inside. If the motivator is from externally, then it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
So that was really very interesting. I'm going to be very naughty today, but I'm going to take a question, which we never do in these panels, but we've got a question here, and I want to pose this question maybe to Lee and Carl, and give Brett a break. And the question is, what do you do when you find yourself in a situation when there is an accident in mining and you are a safety representative officer or safety officer? Lee or Dr. Cole, please feel free to answer the question.
Sorry, just repeat. My phone just started ringing when you started asking the question.
Sure. What do you do when you find yourself in a situation when there is an accident in mining and you are a safety representative officer or a safety officer? What would you do?
You want a short answer or a long answer?
I'm happy to listen.
Yeah. The standard answer would be, it depends on the context. Okay, depends on the magnitude of the accident. But if the answer is what would you do, is first rescue the person, of course, if you can. But I guess the question as a underlying question as what I think what your role should be, if that there, and your role should be there to support line management, I think, to get to the bottom of the fundamental causes of the accident without trying to find the blame. In other words, I would personally try and find the systematic problems. Just a quick example, a couple of years ago, there was a huge, or potentially 41 people fatality. Only one guy died, fortunately or unfortunately, but it could have been 41 in Zambia. Myself and an Australian guy was contracted to go and investigate the accident. And when we got on site, I said to him, "You can interview the witnesses. I want to walk around the mine." And for a week, I visited all sorts of places, including the site of the accident, but also in the working places and in the shafts and in the training centers, to try and understand what drives people to do things on that particular mine. Because Brett made a very strong point. Behavior-based safety is a patch. If you have cancer and you put a sticker on your arm, it's not going to solve the problem. Unfortunately, I've always, even way back in the 90s when it first came up, that was my view, and I still say that today. So you need to understand, and that's where the safety officer on the mine itself has an advantage above the people coming from the outside, to already, or should already know the culture, should already know what the fundamental culture is. Will the people hide things? Why? In fact, I always say a good safety officer should be able to predict the location of the next serious accident on the mine. That's how good you should be in knowing what people do, because changing that belief system doesn't come from the top or the bottom. It comes from inside, I believe, of individuals. And if a safety officer goes down or into the mine or into the plant or into the workshops and chat to people and understand what drives them, that safety officer should be able to know who are the risk takers, because not everybody's risk tolerance levels are the same. Some people will have a lower risk tolerance than others. And therefore, if you know that, and you know what makes that person tick to take shortcuts or not, or to make certain decisions, because the same can be said for so-called risk-based decision making. It's a theory, but if you do not apply it properly, and you do not understand the consequences of your potential decisions, then accidents can and will happen. So it's a very, I don't know, Lee, maybe you can add another dimension to it, but I believe the first thing a safety officer should do is know where the accidents will happen, the next one. I used to make predictions, and then people would say, "You can't, because you are putting a jinx on people." I said, "No, I will tell you this and this will happen." When I left that mine in Zambia, I said to the CEO, "You know what? Your next fatality will be an electrical fatality." And within 2 weeks after that, he phoned me and he said, "How did you know that?" And I said, "Because I spoke to people." People, that's people. So Brett has a lot of more insight into that than I have. I just have some practical experience on that. But I'm telling you, if you know what your people are doing on the mine, if you know the different, I don't want to call it categories of people, but for lack of another word, the categories of people that works in certain environments. And another thing about that that I want to just quickly add is, you know what, this so-called strongman or unbreakable person that works on the mine, I'm tough. I'm working on the mine. I'm very tough, and therefore and it will never happen to me. It always happens to somebody else. So the answer doesn't lie in 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 in, in trying to manipulate people's behavior. It lies in that it must come from inside the person to make those changes, him or herself, to understand I have a responsibility towards my family, first of all my wife, my children, my extended family. I might be the only breadwinner, whatever the situation might be. If that is the motivation, and people have now been trained properly to understand the risks, and is empowered to make decisions, which it's entrenched in the mining health and safety law already, then we can then if that person doesn't make that decision to say, guys, let's not do it. But if you look at the Dr. Solomon in the 1960s already, the power of he did some research on people where he took, I don't want to teach you to suck eggs, but where he had one person who was the subject, but there was like 5 so-called subjects, and they had to select the length of a line. They would show 2 line lengths, and they must say which one is the shortest or the longest line. And more than 73% of the people followed the obvious wrong answer given by the 4 people set that was given their answers. He would rather give the wrong answer and not get his $5 or $1, I can't remember how much, than being different to the other 4 people. And because we are working in teams in the mining industry, it is not just the individual culture, it's a group culture. People will fall in line. I've asked people all over the world often, why didn't you just stop them? You saw. He says, no, because, I don't want to stand out. So this culture thing is big. It's not impossible to solve, though. Lee, please add. Leonie already knows me. I can go on for this for 2 hours, but because it comes not from my head, but from my heart.
Lee, would you like to add?
I mean, Carl said a lot, obviously, and as you said, it comes from the heart. Certainly, I haven't spent enough time with Carl recently, but I think we should catch up. But certainly, I think the one thing that I was thinking about, as Carl spoke, was and talking about predicting the next area where fatality would occur or where incident would occur, or the agency involved, etc. I think it's probably, in an operational context, people are quite familiar with I guess the operating modalities, what people are doing as a rule, the unwritten ground rules, so to speak, as well. I guess from a safety officer point of view, always good rule of thumb to be afraid with some of these leading indicators, that would give you an indication of what is it that could go wrong. But I think the only thing I really want to add is and we speak a lot about culture, and often it's a very complex environment. But I think what we've seen from incident analysis, and I mean we really try and analyze all at least fatal incidents in the mining industry, in the main locally, but also some globally as well. And what you do see is, these repeated cultural, what we call cultural violations or routine violations, And this is exactly, instances where people are allowed to do something that's outside of the expected behavior, outside of the expected norm, outside of the procedure, but we allow people to do it and to act in that manner, because the benefits, that accrues from doing it in a different way to the expected way is obviously, better production, quicker mining, etc., etc. So I think that is still something we need to root out as a mining industry. I mean, if I try and draw the comparison to other high risk industries like nuclear or aviation, etc., certainly in those environments, and I was just, on a plane. I don't know the planes as well as Brett do, but I was on a plane the other day, and I was just thinking about, these pilots that do, these, regular routes. They fly the same route day in and day out, but there's no, you know, I would say, expectation from the pilot. As he starts up that plane or engages the engines or whatever, there's no expectations that things would just be, you know, in place and working as they should because they worked that way yesterday. They still go through every single, check, you know, and make sure that everything is working as it should. Where I think in mining it's quite different. We presume that the roof support is in place because it was in place in the previous shift, or we presume that all the controls on the tractor's mobile machinery is working because it was working yesterday, the brakes or whatever the case might be, and we don't verify controls. So we get into this mode of just mining without checking that we are doing it safely. I think that's the only bit I would like to add to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Lee and Cole. I want to steer the discussion a little bit closer to training, and we are running a little bit out of time. So I want to open the floor to all three the panelists, and pose the question that was sent in by Mr. Makufola, and Mr. Makufola asks, which training can you recommend for mine management? So which training course should we recommend for management, mining management, who prioritizes production over health and safety implementation? So as we know, production is a big thing, and we understand and respect that. But if I understand this question correctly, what training should we give management to make them realize that it's not only about production? And I'm opening the floor to any of our three panelists. Lee, can I put you on the spot to ask you to start?
I see Brett is keen to come in, Dione.
Brett, please go for it.
I'm actually too nervous to come in first, so I think you should start, and then I'll take it. Go for it.
No, question is, what training would you recommend for mine management, prioritizing production over health and safety? I just think that I'm not sure if I think everyone would like me to say training is the solution. I think it's rather a matter of again, the values of the company, the culture. I think it's a matter of the mine managers understanding what is required to work safely. I mean, Carl spoke earlier about the people having hands-on experience, in the early days, and going through all of those, tasks personally, as part of being a learner miner. And I keep going back to one of our mines locally, extremely deep level gold mine that I think it was about 3 years back in 2018, 2019, in that period there. They did detailed time studies of every single activity involved in the entire mining cycle, and they actually found that what they require from the employees to do in that mining cycle goes far beyond the 24 hours. So they extended their entire mining cycle to a 48-hour cycle, which in effect meant that they obviously lose a number of tons. But that was ultimately what was required, at that operation to mine safely. So your targets are then set by what you can actually physically do, with due consideration of all the tasks, everything in terms of the making safe process and verifying controls, etc. And I think that was visionary by the leader at that operation, by that person that's part of mine management, that then said, well, we need to set up people to succeed. We need to enable and empower people to do the right things. So I think most mine managers understand these things intellectually, but I think when the pressure comes from a corporate perspective to maximize your production outputs, then I think things get shifted around, and then we often take decisions or borderline decisions, or all of a sudden our risk appetite changes slightly because we also need to keep other parties happy in the process. So yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe there is some training, but I'll leave that to Brett and Carl to maybe add on to if there is such.
Great.
Yeah, here's the Tamaleki. So I'm going to sort of say, phone me, I'll give you the best training in the world. So I have the solution. But I think what Lee is saying is critical, because training is not the solution. Because it's coming back to the understanding that knowledge is not the primary driver of human behavior. So you can have the best training, and I think this is, let's bring VFLs, because that was part of the conversation, is I can know how to do a VFL. That if I come on site and go, what the freaking hell are you doing, Dione? You see, I know the framework, but how I've just spoken to you is so rude, so demeaning, and we've just bombed it. So the fact that you've been on training doesn't mean you're going to do it. So for me, it's, while as a company we provide a lot of training, training is not the answer. If you're going to do training, it's got to be intentionally, strategically aligned to outcomes. If it's a standalone, don't waste your money. And how's it integrated in your processes? Because people are busy. We're already under pressure to meet our targets. Now you want to add to my timelines, and then we get a lot of resistance. So if you don't bring those components, I almost want to say don't bother. If we're going to do it, the reality is, and I see we've got just a few minutes, is imagine, it hasn't happened, but imagine I go to a petrol station, I pull up, and the attendant, very friendly, really nice, he comes up and he takes the, whatever this thingy is, and he puts it into my car, and he starts to fill it up with the cheapest petrol. I'm immediately going to go, whoa, what are you doing? And he's going, I'm trying to save you money because, petrol's expensive. And I go, no, you don't understand. My car needs diesel. And I think here's the issue is we can have the best intention of what we think we should be offering people. But wise leaders understand it's got nothing to do about my opinion, my desires, my intent. It's got to do with how do I get optimal of my people. And so it's what are the skills needed to create the culture we want and in our interactions that gets optimal. And unfortunately, if we don't have training that takes how people make decisions, doesn't look at how the brain works, that training will not have the optimal impact that it was. So there's a lot of things when it comes to our interactions with people that, and Lee mentioned that. The fact is, I'm an engineer, I'm a miner, I'm an accountant, I've got an MBA. And so we've got all of this knowledge, but doesn't mean I know anything about working with people. And if you look at most executives and most senior leaders, they are well qualified in areas that has nothing to do with people. And if you have training that doesn't take the brain science of decision making into play, your training simply won't deliver results. So if you're going to bring in training, you've got to find companies like myself that takes these, not just popular psychology, but the neuroscience of human behavior. If you don't have that into play, with all honesty, you're just wasting time and you're wasting money.
Absolutely. We are.
Brett, yeah, I don't want to say along. I just want to say, Brett, that was absolutely exactly my my thinking as well.
Oh.
The alignment, because the problem that we're sitting with is, I think you know what I think, and that is a problem. If you as a leader do not understand that, stop telling people to do and start asking them what they think and listen to them. You know what my father-in-law used to say? A fish starts rotting at his head. Now, if we are rotten and we do not want to understand that we have qualified and experienced people working in our environments to make decisions, then we need to take the consequences. If we start asking people their opinions, listen to them. If you don't understand, ask again. If it's completely, don't tell them, because the decades of being the leader because you know more than the other people have long gone. The decade and the century of dealing with people as individuals, those people that can do and will continue to do that will be the leaders of the future. So we need to ask the questions, and if the solution that the person is coming up with is a roughly 70% okay with me, let him go, because then it's his or her solution. And I do not even have to supervise it any longer, because I will prove to you that my decision is better. If you force me to use your decision, I will prove to you that your decision doesn't work. And that is part of the longer term problems that we're facing. Because we're standing with one of our legs still in the so-called middle ages of management. We want to show people that we know better. We know the answers. Instead of letting the people, we're hiring a complete person. We do not only hire the 2 pairs of hands or the 2 feet. We also hire their brains. But people, a lot of unsuccessful managers do not get that. They still want to show people, I'm the manager because I know more than you. No, you should be the manager, the leader, the supervisor, the whatever, because you know how to work with people. You know how to get the best out of people. You know what? Way back in the 60s already, people were saying, what is management? Management is getting things done through people. They didn't realize how accurate that is. How do you get things done by people? By making them owners of their own destiny. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a poor miner who's got these weird ideas. And if I talk, that is the kind of thing that I go out and coach people. Ask questions. Stop telling people, and don't work about the past. We cannot change the past. Let's forget about why didn't you get production yesterday? Why did that accident happen yesterday? Let us prevent the accident tomorrow. Let us say, what will I do today to get today's production? If we start changing that mindset, if we start changing that focus and say, well, I will get my people to do what they can do best. I will not force people to do things that I know how to do, but I'm not even sure they know how to do that. Sorry, me.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that very, very well-informed and engaging response from our 3 panelists. Well, we've come to the end of our session today, and I have not nearly exhausted all my questions. So I think we really should consider a follow-up session to this conversation, because there's still so much to discuss. about mine health and safety, and what's new and what's now and what's next in health and safety in the mining industry. Very relevant topic. I want to thank all our three panelists. It was really very interesting discussion, and I still have so many questions, and I think the delegates too. But thank you for participating, Carl, Lee, and Brett. And to all our delegates that made the time on this Friday afternoon to join us, we really hope that you will have a fantastic weekend and be safe. And please feel free if you have any questions that you would like to ask Lee or Brett or Carl, then please, you're welcome to send them to me, and I will convey them. If you want their contact details, you're also welcome to have their contact details. They unfortunately don't all work for Safety Cloud, but I can give you their contact details. And thank you also for the mention to legal liability. Safety Cloud do have some courses on legal liability, and then we didn't even get to the time to speak about the Sandtrack Masterclass in Mining, which Dr. Carl has developed, and that was also reviewed by a mining industry expert from the Northern Cape. So there's still lots of topics that we didn't exhaust this afternoon. We will definitely have to have a follow-up. But I wish you a fantastic weekend, a warm weekend for those that's in Cape Town. I believe it's very cold.
Sure.
And please, whatever you do, be safe.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Dione, can I ask, and this is your forum, so I'm more than willing to stay on a few minutes if people have questions or stuff like that. So if you want to bring it to an end, then bring it to an end. But I have a meeting in an hour. So if you want to stay on a few minutes, I'm more than willing.
Same on my side.
Sorry, I've got a hard stop, so but
Okay.
I'm happy to join in the next session. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Lee. It's nice seeing you again.
Same, Brett.
Lee,
Thanks, Carl.
please contact me. I'll send. You can get my info from Dione, and Brett. I would like to chat to you as well. I like your approach very much.
Okay. I'll make sure that I get hold of you during the week.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thanks, colleagues. All the best.
Thank you, Dione, for arranging this. I think just listening to the other panelists as well. The people are both Brett and Lee. I've known Lee for many years, but I know that he's got safety right in his heart, and I've just seen that Brett is exactly the same as us. So thank you very much for doing that.
Okay. It looks like we've lost Dione. As I say, I'm willing to stay in a few minutes. If anyone's got questions before you leave, you're welcome to throw it at us, and let's see if we can assist. Dr. Cole, I'm not seeing any hands, so if yeah, okay, then I think we are going to call it today then.
Yep, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. There, Dione's back.
Yeah. You're on mute.
Mute.
My computer, for some other reason, did a restart. I think it was so fascinated by the good conversation, but I'm so glad to see you guys are still here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like we've come to a point where I think that maybe you can arrange another one like this with people sending in more questions, because there's no hands. So Brett is clearly also, and I can't see any hands as well. So maybe we can take this up at a later stage.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much, panelists, and thank you, delegates. Really appreciate the conversation.
Have a great weekend. All the best.
Enjoy
Thank
the
you so
weekend.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.